Hi, everyone. This is Anshu. You are watching the June 15 podcast, and today we have a special guest. He is Saad Abbas. He is a small business owner. He is the owner of an accounting firm, Snap Advisory, based out of the Los Angeles area. He specializes in comprehensive financial solutions for small businesses and individuals. So things like business advisory services, fractional and virtual CFO, small business bookkeeping, individual tax planning, and basically any financial help you may need. Saad, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So the topic for today's podcast is slightly different. Like usually we'll have people who are pro outsourcing or offshoring, who have done this, and who are big proponents. But today we wanted to talk to like a CPA firm owner who's in the process of evaluating whether or not this makes sense. Because the questions that Saad will have, the concerns that he would have, are the concerns that a lot of you would have. So, Saad, we'll start with a simple question. Like, tell us more about your background. Like, how did you get started, and walk us through your journey to your current firm?
Yeah, definitely. So my background, I started out in a small CPA firm, doing just about everything, which is the best way to learn because when you're in a small firms, you're getting a little bit of everything. There is no specialized person or resource on staff. From there, I jumped to a lot of private roles, and eventually, I was also doing some level of consulting with small businesses on the side, some tax work, just to kind of make sure I was up to date. And then I, just started concentrating on my career. Did head of finance and accounting for a couple of different organizations. Always very nosy into operations as well, just because everything in my mind that happened in operations, they translates to an accounting transaction, which then translates to financials, which then translates to how the business is doing. So I was very nosy into that. A couple of years ago, I started building up my, let's say, tax side again. So started building that up again and getting more and more into it. I was still primarily concentrating on fractional CFO type roles or interim CFO type roles. And that's just how it ended up happening. I left one job, and as I was looking for another one, the contract came up and it was good. And another contract came up, and I'm an operation and finance guy, so the sales isn't my background, but they just kept coming, so I took advantage of them while I built out my firm. And then in 2023, I acquired another CPA firm based out of San Jose, actually. Physical location. Before this, I was 100% remote. I work with many contractors, kind of all over the world, but also a lot in the U.S. Other small business consultants like myself. Usually, when we bring on big projects, but when I acquired the firm, the focus was on, hey, I think I can add on top of the value. A big theme you'll notice with me in general is I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Somebody's already solved this problem. There are very few new problems in this world. Somebody's already solved it. I'd rather take what they have and build on top of that. Same concept when it comes to small business. I got very involved when I was doing my consulting. It was M&A transaction advisory. So I got very involved with acquiring businesses and prepping businesses for sale. And, I started thinking more and more like I should be doing this. And that's kind of where, and I know accounting and I know tax. So I'm going to jump into this and really modernize the firm, right? So the value that a new buyer brings into any of these transactions is updating the processes, updating the systems, training the staff, putting in processes and systems like EOS is a really good example of this. That you want to scale, not something crazy, but big enough so that the business isn't relying on any one person, including the owner. So that's kind of the goal. And I just thought that this would be the best shortcut there because you have an established client base, you have good staff, and we're going to be talking about that today. But that was a big factor in this: is how do you best leverage or get the best staff? And one of it's like, hey, why don't, instead of getting one staff, why not get an entire team, right? That's the package you get and because somebody spent 20 years building up a practice, and just, what do you do with that? You can build on top of that, or you can start from scratch. And pros and cons of both sides, right? But that's the route I went. And the idea here is provide better service, provide better value to our clients. Really where I like to focus is like, okay, anybody can do a tax return, but like what value are you providing? And that's what all the new clients coming in are asking for as well, right? I can't get a hold of my CPA, and I never know what this. He shoots me an email once a year, and putting in a couple of modern touches to it really makes it a more of a modern accounting firm.
I think that's a hot topic right now about how CPAs should add, or how they should and can add more value to their clients, and how they become a modern firm. So you talked a bit about staffing, right? So when I talk to CPAs, when I attend conferences, one of the biggest things I hear is we can't find accountants. There's a big talent shortage. So tell me, like, is that your experience too? Like, how is that impacting you?
Yeah. So initially, the nice thing is, so I'm still small. I have 5 people, including myself, right? And I think the talent is out there. I think people don't want to pay for the talent, or they don't want to let the talent work remotely. I know a lot of people that are like, hey, I would take like a $20,000-$30,000 hit if I could just work remotely and move to a low cost of living area, and still have a better quality of life. This is coming from someone from Southern California, so like there is a big difference in cost of living that people can adjust for. And it's a bunch of accountants, so it's not like they want to live in downtown noisy areas.
Yeah.
It's like want to live a nice, quiet, peaceful, like introverted life. Not that there aren't extroverts, but now I'm just being defensive against the people that get offended when I call them introverts. So staffing, I feel like, is out there. And when we talk about outsourcing, if you're thinking about outsourcing, you're already thinking about 100% remote, right? That's a given.
Yeah.
Well, and as outsourcing becomes more and more popular, it starts getting pricier too for the better talent. So yeah, you can outsource for real cheap, but guess what? That causes other problems. So then you start spending more money, and then you start spending more of your time trying to manage the talent. And then all of a sudden you're getting pretty close to maybe not that close, but you're starting to creep up on maybe not dollars, but your time.
Yeah.
And then now you're hiring a U.S. resource to manage the overseas. And then it's like, well, I'm not quite there just yet. So I think one of the barriers to entry, I think we'll talk about like the agency versus a direct hire model. But it's really hard for small businesses to compete in that regard. However, and this is part of the business model that I'm leaning towards now, which is going back to that adding value. Well, value isn't, the providing value is you want to do something that's meaningful for the client, but then you also charging for that value as well. So, gone are the days of the $600 tax return, or some people even pay like $200 a tax return. I don't know how. That doesn't even cover my software fees. So, you're moving over to, hey, there's a monthly subscription tied to your tax return, because you want somebody that's available to you when you have, even if it's quick questions. It spreads the cost of the tax return out throughout the year as well. And you're able to provide resources, right? So fewer clients, better service, higher value service to those clients. And when I think about it like that, then it starts becoming, hey, do I just target more low cost of living areas and target full-time remote positions in the US? Or do I still need to consider outsourcing specifically for the scalability, right? So not direct hires, but working through a company, because a company's already established, right? They have teams of people. They know the area. They can scale much faster than I can. Just like what I do for a living is advise small businesses and, build up their foundation with their bookkeeping, and there's the fractional CFO advisory side of it. That's what I do. I don't staff companies, right? So you would reach, I'm always been a big proponent of, paying people for the value they bring. And that would be the one thing that I would really look for in an outsourcing partner is, okay, what type of resources do you bring that I can't get myself, and what type of value does that add to the business itself?
Okay.
Long answer to a simple question.
No, I think you preempted a lot of my other questions. So let's start slowly, right? So we talked a bit about direct ownership versus working with a partner, right? So one thing you mentioned that's better about working with a partner is the scalability part of it. Like when you look at direct ownership, like what are some thoughts that come to your mind in terms of both pros and cons?
immediately when you say direct ownership, immediately my mind goes to compliance with IT security, right?
Hmm.
Now, for the same reason, I wouldn't tell anyone to have a server in their office. That goes for CPAs as well that have like, a beatable server in their closet. Like, that's all your client's data. You think that's secure versus like a data center where there's armed guards, there's backups, there's people that do this for a living monitoring the security. Like, it's not a matter of if you get breached, you will get breached. And it's just a matter of
Hmm.
who's available to catch it. So IT infrastructure is a big part of partnering with somebody that has many clients, right? So there's that social proof aspect of it as well. Like, hey, there's a lot of CPA firms that have trusted them. There's a lot of people that have vetted them. Now, I found that that's not always the case, right? A lot of people are not doing that thorough vetting as I am because I'm just paranoid about this. However, you also then have these leaks of like the entire, anybody who ever owned land in the US, now their data is out there with the latest breach from the data broker. So does it matter at the end of the day? Well, you just don't want to be the one responsible for your client's safe data, right? So compliance with IT regulations, there's IRS regulations, FTC regulations, California Privacy Act regulations. It's a lot. And you want somebody that knows the ins and outs of those, not just at a surface level like I would when I'm reading these. And then so that, again, like a long way of saying the resources you get from a partner who does this for a living is just significantly more than any small business can provide and dedicate to having even one dedicated person offshore. Now, if you switch, that's a different story, right? Because now you're building out an office. You're a large enough firm where you can put in that investment to build it out, and then you have full-time people that manage those people and manage the IT security. But that might not be the case for a lot of smaller CPA firms, especially under, let's say, the $2 million mark, or even the $1 million, especially the $1 million mark, where it requires capital investment to get something that I would feel comfortable with, to get something up securely, set up in any country, really.
So that's a very good point. Like when I talk to people about offshoring, like regardless of whether they want to work with an outsourcing company or do direct hires, data security is top of mind. So regardless of what option you take, right? If you work with reputable outsourcing companies, they have like all processes in place to make sure like your data is secure. With direct hire too, right? So your data, in either case, your data never travels to like India or Philippines, wherever. Your data stays where it is. So right now, let's say you use, I don't know, Amazon Cloud Services or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Your data never leaves that US server. With direct hire, you have somebody in, let's say we're just going to use India as an example. You have somebody who just uses the VPN to log into your servers here. And that's the case with outsourcing companies too. Um, so that is one of the biggest things that comes up, and people don't realize that your data never goes to a foreign country. Your data always stays in the US within your infrastructure. Now, some companies, so I know Big Four do that, and I don't recommend smaller firms do this. What they do is they have these they ask their people in offshore locations to leave their phones, leave everything, and then walk into a room where they're working. I mean, it works. If you're a Big Four, you can demand those things. But for a smaller firm, if you ask people to do that, they're not going to join you, because the way they look at it is, if this person has such a big lack of trust, right, then maybe they're not ready for offshoring yet. So you'll still get people, but they're not the people you would want. So that's how it works with data security, right? It never really leaves the US. Now, there's fear and there's danger, right? So I think the risk of your data getting stolen, I don't think it increases per se if you have an offshore team, but your fear goes up because you're like, it's just the fear of unknown. I've never traveled to this country. You may or may not have met those people. So you're like, it's for my peace of mind, right? So that's what I tell clients. Like when you're thinking of data, it's more for your peace of mind that we want to put in these things. And so I'll give you an example. For the last client, their team that we set up in India. So
Mm-hmm.
their office only has biometric entry. So no one who's not authorized can enter the office. They don't have a printer in the office, so you can't really print anything. The laptops are shell laptops. You can't like download anything on the laptop. Everything has to be done on the US servers. let's see what else. We have like cameras everywhere except restrooms. So, and the camera feeds can be altered and edited from India. Like only somebody in the US can do that. So there's a lot of things. Some companies do this, that they have software on the laptop that takes a screenshot every few seconds. And if they see something, like you're trying to transfer data or something, it catches it. So there's a lot of stuff people do. Like if somebody put a software on my laptop, I'd be like, I'm not working for you. But a lot of people do that. So that's sort of your equation with data, regardless of you direct hire or third parties. I don't know if that helped or if that scared you more.
No, if you step back, you think about it logically, like that's way more secure than any U.S. accounting firm. What
Yes.
U.S. accounting firm makes like their staff like keep their phones, outside the office? Of course, they're usually locked behind card key or something access, but I mean, as strong as IT is, you're not stopping anyone from pulling out their cell phone, taking a screenshot of something. You're not stopping. I mean, there's bigger fears, and just like anywhere else, there's just people. They're trying to come
Yeah.
in and do a job, and it's nobody joins nobody joins these firms with the intent of I'm going to steal all this data and this. I think what everyone's trying to do is more of limit the exposure that's going on.
Yeah.
And none of this is a big deal until there's a problem. Then it's the biggest of deals, right? It's
Yeah.
one of those things with risk management. And this is what I was saying when I try to get comfort around this, asking other firm owners, how are you doing this and what made you do this? They're going 7216 is a very popular thing to
Yeah.
discuss when it comes to this, and they just have like a little couple of sentences buried in their engagement letters. And I don't know how detailed. I realize you're not a legal expert, but um, from my initial review of it from a while ago now, I guess I need to go back to it. My understanding and the AICPA and how they give out their templates is it needs to be a standalone document, right? So then now where's that to me is like not transparent, let's say, of business owners and firm owners to do, right? Because I have no problem using outsourcing, but I'm not going to hide it.
Yeah.
That's what it's the same thing. It's the same thing you tell your kids. Like if you have to hide it, it's probably something you shouldn't be doing, right? Like that's I think pretty fair. So part of it is making sure that we have the right clientele. The other part of that is making sure that we're transparent about how we do everything. Most of the time, and this goes for a lot of our clients in general, like, we're like, hey, here's your tax return, please review it and sign off on it. And you send it, you get it back in like 2 minutes, and you're like, you did not review it. Like, we're humans there, we make mistakes. Same thing with financials. Somebody will email me and they're like, oh, hey, what was the password for these financial documents? And you're like, it's been like 4 months, you haven't like logged in to check your stuff. It's crazy. So a lot of this mostly for making sure you dot the i's, cross the t's, but there's a reason why the regulations are in place. My
So,
biggest complaint really though is it's not being enforced, right? The IRS isn't really enforcing this, like I said, unless there's actually like a breach, then it all comes into play. But until then, like where's the incentives for other firms to comply?
well, there's criminal penalties if you don't comply, so that's a pretty big stick. But so
True.
70 to 16, right? So,
Yeah.
like, uh, are you afraid, or are you, like, does it scare you? Like, what would my clients think if I serve them up a 70 to 16? Is that on your mind at all? What would they think?
Not so much, no, because like I said, most people probably wouldn't care. They wouldn't deal with it. There's some clients, especially because the firm I acquired had some, mature clients that are a lot more traditional, and they want to talk. They only want to talk to me. They only want to talk to the CPA,
Mhm.
and it's and they fail to realize that, hey, if I prepped your entire return, your return is going to cost like $3,000-4,000. You have to use staff for the preparation. Then you get my eyes on it to review it, or my team's eyes, who the actual credentialed preparers and reviewers to take a look at it. So I don't think too many clients have an issue, and everybody I've talked to has been very similar. Like, oh yeah, we were very stressed out about this, but then nobody said anything.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a common trend now. everyone thinks they're unique and special. So like the block of clients I'm thinking, but none of their stuff would go overseas anyways because of the level of complexity of those clients in the first place. So this doesn't necessarily help me with my tax planning side of the business. This is, again, the things that people have found is best for outsourcing are repeatable processes. Now say what you will, but that seems to be the trend, because any people who can really do the, let's say, more complex layer of work, A, they start getting expensive. B, they start realizing, hey, I don't want to go to one of these little factory farms, go in, log into a computer and just do this. I want more challenging work. So those aren't the people that are working at most of those firms anyway. So everyone I've talked to is like, okay, first solidify your own processes, then you can start outsourcing. And the same thing is true with your own staff if you're planning on growing, right? So internally, I want to grow, so I'm putting in the tools and processes now so that when a new person comes in, it's easy for them to flow. And we're all doing it the same way, so anybody can jump in and support. Now, because I have those solid foundations, if I outsource, even inside the US, if I bring in a temporary CPA for the tax season, or if I go outsourcing company, they can plug in and they know my processes and they can just jump right in. I don't have to, explain every little step. It's already documented. It's already standardized throughout the firm.
So I want to go back to something you said about 70-16, where you spoke to a lot of people and they were like, well, I was afraid what my clients were going to say, but they said nothing. So that's actually what I've heard from a lot of CPAs I talked to too, that we were worried. And they already knew some clients that were not going to be okay, just like you did. But for the most part, right, everybody just like signed it and sent it back. And my client, I asked him like, hey, how did you address the people who asked questions? So he said that I just told them, well, if you don't want this to happen, you'll have to go downstream, because almost everybody who's our size and bigger has like an offshore resource, either direct ownership or through an outsourcing company. So it's like that was something that sort of opened their eyes that, all right, I still like this firm. And so sure, if you trust them, that's fine. And in some cases, well, this is like a shameless plug, I guess, when it's your employees, right? So people are like, all right, if they're your people, then it makes me feel a tad bit better. So yeah, that did not come off as educational. All right.
No, you're good. No, there's something to be said about it, right? And the big thing is, my clients are trusting me to make a smart decision on their behalf, right? When it comes to my decision making on what position we should take on some tax situations or a tax scenario, hey, we should do it this way, we should do it that way, or even on the advisory side, hey, operationally, what tool should we use? What type of risk does it pose to go this way or that way, or a combination of the two? A lot of times it's don't do things just to save money on taxes if it doesn't make sense for you, like common sense wise, right? Don't spend money to save money. That's not a good use of things. But my biggest fear is not necessarily the client's not accepting it. It's really around the security of the data and compliance with the laws, because they are not friendly. They're not small business friendly. They're not end user friendly. You have to get the same thing with tax returns. The tax code is not user friendly. You need a professional to go through it. Even now, I have to go back so much to research things, and just imagine doing that with an industry or a subject that you're not familiar with. It's mind-boggling how crazy that would be. So the client acceptance is it's a risk. It's out there, right? But it's not as high as making sure that you're covered from a risk management perspective. Of your data is covered, your clients are protected, and of course you're in compliance with the law.
It makes sense to me. Where do you have worries about the quality of work? What I hear from a lot of companies that are, well, I'm going to save that for later. Like, is that a thought at all? Like preconceptions about like quality issues?
Yeah. So the way I think of it is everything's my fault. So if there's a lack of quality, that's my fault. If the resources I provide for my staff who do the review do a poor job, that's also my fault for not vetting them properly, right? So it all comes down to who's going to take ownership of this, and focus on what you can control. You can control your own processes, you can control a documented system, and you can put in systems that kind of vet the data before it gets to you. And there's trial and error parts of it too, right? Sometimes it will not be a mesh. So if there's more security, or there's more maybe reliability, is if you hire a dedicated full-time person, you train that person, they're a part of your team. Even with the time difference, hopefully you could get a little overlap. And however, if it doesn't work out, you're in the same spot as you would be here, right? Which it's not necessarily the cost of the employee, it's the cost of your time, the month or two that it took to ramp up that employee. That cost doesn't go, the time cost never goes away. So that's what you're really trying to manage. And with a team's perspective, right, when you have an agency approach to it, you're dealing with a dedicated account manager or a dedicated resource, but then they have a team doing the work. So you pay more, but you're also shifting the risk. This isn't IT risk or legal risk. This is process operations risk. Hey, I told you that it needs to be done like this. You're giving back to me with the same problems again. You need to go and fix this. And especially if it's fixed fee, right? So then it's like, well, no, I'm not paying you for that because this wasn't done to specification. And it's harsh, but that's the part of the agency. Like, I would never talk to an employee like that. That's, but if you're a service provider, right? This is it's the exact same thing that my client would be upset with me if my staff made a mistake. And I'm like, I understand. Like, you can get upset, right? Like, I'd never yell or be abusive, but it's very factual in the sense that this is what we agreed to. This is what I'm paying for. This, you did not deliver. Please fix this. And if it doesn't get fixed, fine. Like, we'll have to move on to something else.
Okay, let's talk about countries. So, I mean, I know the answer to this question, but like, what country are you looking at for, offshoring?
Yeah, I'm not too particular. One thing is, I mean, the two most popular places are India and Philippines. I know all the big four have like full-on offices in India. I've had good luck with Philippines on like smaller projects, but I'm relatively open. It doesn't necessarily matter. It's a wide open world, and depending on the work, it's there. The other thing too is they're not client facing, right? So if I
that's
wanted
up to you, yeah.
Well, I mean, if I wanted somebody, you're going, let's say, to a higher tier of service level that's client facing versus not, and client facing being more video and calls versus text, right? Because even now, if I really wanted to, right, I can make a clone of myself in AI, and I can have my team put in some text and have my clone speak the text in my voice, right? Where that is on the dishonesty scale, is whatever, but at the same time, you can scale out that operations. On the other hand, what are we hiring? Are we hiring like a task, or are we hiring a person? And that's really, in my mind, the differentiator between agency and in hiring individuals is you're hiring someone to be a part of your team versus you're hiring someone to complete a process.
I like that. I like how you've put it. Like, I'm going to steal that.
Please
Because
do.
if you're hiring to like just fix a process or a task, then outsourcing makes a lot more sense. But if you want to bring in an individual to be a part of your team, then direct hire. All right, that was my sales brain. Sorry, continue.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So when it comes to that, if I was thinking a direct hire, I would think of the Philippines over India, mostly because I don't know exactly what it is. One other firm owner told me I'm Pakistani, he was Indian, so we're good. We can talk about this. And he was telling me why is it the perception of the it's better service from Philippines than India? And his concept was the the customer service concept that Americans are used to isn't there in India. It's
Interesting.
much more so present in the Philippines, and I can see that, right? And I see that in Pakistani restaurants. You go to the restaurant, the food's great, the service is subpar at best, but you go there because of the food, not because of the service. So I think it is a cultural aspect to it, and I haven't dug that far into it. I just know that that has been my experience, and other people have shared that experience. So on the Philippine side, maybe it is that customer service. I'm not sure, what it is. It's just, again, just more experiences with it.
I'll share my perspective. So you'll find both countries like good at like pretty much everything that they do. What I've seen with Philippines is like objectively speaking, I think it'll be cheaper for you. And second, I think you'll have retaining people isn't as hard in Philippines as it is in India
Interesting.
because the supply demand thing, like, you want to go with India if you want to build a bigger team or if you want to hire more than just junior accountants. So in India, you'll find everybody from a junior accountant to a director level CPA and lots of them, right? So that's where India shines. But like for smaller teams, and all of these, you'll find CPAs in Philippines too. But what I have learned by talking to firm owners is like for smaller tasks for like junior people, they've found better luck with Philippines. But this higher you move up, right? India starts to make more sense. But the decision, like then it comes off to like, all right, India is getting, I mean, it's still cheaper than the US. You'll still save half or 40, 50%, but it still starts to get pricey. So that's one part of it. The other challenge with India is I mean, if you Google it or if you, I bet like if you do this on LinkedIn, hey, I'm looking for an offshore resource, you'll get 10,000 responses tomorrow. So how do you separate like the good from the bad from the worst? Like, how do you do that? So that becomes really hard. I'll give you one more option. I'm doing this right now. It's actually not even, I haven't talked about it at all. Argentina. So I'm actually flying to Argentina next month because I am looking for another option to give to clients that, hey, India is good. There's a lot of good things going for it, but there's a lot of challenges with India too. There's time zone, there's cultural differences. It is starting to get a bit pricey. So that's one more option you could look at. Argentina. It's going to be in a similar time zone. There's a lot of cultural compatibility, um, and it's a lot cheaper than India too.
Interesting.
So, so that's I
But
before this
Argentina,
call.
Jamal, how's the infrastructure in Argentina?
So we're only looking at Buenos Aires, right?
Okay,
That's the only
so
city we're looking at. And I actually was on a call with an associate in Argentina for an hour and a half before this, and I had the same question. I was like, "Tell me about the power situation, right?" I was like,
tell me about
and
the internet speed and power reliability.
yeah, I was like, internet speed, power, and like, I mean, I don't know much about Argentina except that soccer, right? But like it's in the news for like a lot of political and economic
Right,
instability,
right.
right? So like his thing was if you're gonna be in Buenos Aires, I think you're golden, right? Outside of that, like yeah, you may have issues. And even within Buenos Aires, like if we focus on the right areas, I mean it's the same in India.
True. It's the same in the
So
U.S.
it's the same in the US. So that's one more thing, like when I compare India and Philippines, like Philippines, you'll have better luck with work from home people. In India, like most people, most accounting firms want their people to come to an office, but then the infrastructure is a whole lot better in India, like the speeds and everything. But again, like retaining people it's starting to bite. Where you're like, ooh, didn't think we're gonna have to do that here too. So yeah, Argentina. That's I don't have a full report yet. I will by this time next month, but
Hmm.
that's something I'm also looking at. And
Interesting.
having like dual, like having people who are bilingual in English and Spanish, I think a big portion of the US would appreciate that. So,
Yeah, actually, one of some of the firms that I was eyeballing, even now, like I still look at growing more of the advisory side, as people have been using a lot of, not a lot, but the new player in the field, and people have been doing this for a long time, but is Mexico,
yeah.
because it's so close, right? So that's been another thing. I mean, there are good people all over the place. It's just when you go overseas, it's just so much harder because you're not familiar with the culture, you're not familiar with the location, the geography, the politics. It makes it very, very, very difficult.
It's challenging,
The
and
more
that's
I
why
talk about it, the more I talk myself into like I probably should go with an agency. Like,
it's absolutely fine. Like a lot of people who start out, they start out with an agency or um, because it's just easier, right? And direct ownership, it's a heavy lift in the beginning, right? I mean, that's why I have a job. If it was easier, I wouldn't be
you're
needed,
solving
right?
people's problem and you're providing value.
Exactly, right. So it's the same thing, right? All right, do I go with something that I can get started with right now, or do I go with something that I know in the long term would be better, but it'll take a year or so of figuring it out and putting in that time. So, and you can always switch, right? You can go with outsourcing now, and if it makes sense, you're like, all right, I'm ready to do my own thing. Or you do your own thing right away, and you're like, oh, this is too much work. I'm switching to an agency. So either way, it's fine. So I want to go through all of my questions. We
Sure.
talked about pretty much everything. This was pretty awesome. I didn't have to look at my questionnaire once. We just went through.
All right.
um,
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on myself for that. I need to shut up sometimes. I'll
so I think I just have like two questions. Would you ever consider like tying up or like teaming up with like-minded smaller firms and then having your own capability, like a shared capability, like a timeshare? So you're spreading out the risk, you're spreading out the cost, but you have that social proof or that social comfort that there's three of us in it. Um, but then that'll be like a direct thing, not through an agency. Agency you can go through just by yourself. I just want to get your thoughts on that. Is that something that's appealing? And then I'll tell you why I'm asking.
I mean, I could guess why, but also, also, like, what's the appeal? Why would I want to go that route versus direct? In my mind, if it's a shared resource, um, there's going to be a problem in our profession. We have
Okay.
a busy season, and things need to get prioritized. It's hard enough managing your own staff, but how are you going to manage your staff when they're stressed out and they have to manage three separate workloads instead of one, right? Yes, they have maybe dedicated hours. I think it adds a layer of complexity that's unnecessary.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the same reason people are cautious with part-time employees that do the same job for multiple people. Our It's a lot easier with physical part-time people. Like they have to come here to do something, maybe in the office, right? I know you're not working with on anyone else's stuff when you're in my office, but when you're remote and you know you don't know what that person's doing, and it's really a matter of who's screaming the loudest. And I don't have time to scream at people, so like you're almost it's time is so short and I have such limited resources. Why would I go for an unproven path? Right? Let
Okay.
somebody else test it out. Let them see if it really works out for them, and then maybe I'll take a look. But there's proven models already. Why wouldn't I go for something like that if there's some real advantage to doing it this other way? So I don't see an advantage of looking at it any other way.
That's very interesting. The reason I was asking was I get asked a lot by people who are not accountants but adjacent that, hey, why don't you do something like a co-op where it's like a timeshare where people can pool resources?
Ask
I
them to
don't
put their
know.
money behind that and be like, yeah, I'll do it. It's $10,000 buy-in for and it's this commitment. I'll do it for you. Because
So yeah,
people talk, right? Like I see this with clients. I see this with the firm owners. Firm owners that are like, "Oh man, I have to do this. I have to get better." And they're like, "Okay, well, what have you done to get better in the last week?" So we
yeah.
talked about this last time, and it's been a month. What have you done since? Oh, nothing. Okay, well, you're not serious about it because the more I start focusing on my business, the less and less I start putting up with other people's and like these talking. just talking about things. I'm like, yeah, okay, I got work to do. Like, I love working with like motivate. So that's actually my favorite type of client, is clients with purpose, right? Like, I have this problem and we can solve that for you. Even my bookkeeping clients, right? Like, I started with advisory, but it's such a pain because the books always sucked. So it's like, okay, well, let me build out the bookkeeping side, and then we can add on the advisory, and somewhere in the middle too, where a lot of small businesses don't necessarily need like a real CFO or even a real controller. They need little hints of advisory every quarter. Here's a package that includes all of that. But the ones that I like are the ones that are motivated. Hey, we are doing this bookkeeping, we are doing this advisory because you have a goal in mind. And it could be whatever goal, but you have something you're working towards, and we are helping you get there. And those clients appreciate you. And it is night and day difference for me and my team to work with clients that appreciate you, right? It's a little thank you, a little bit of this. And I forget why we're talking about this.
We started talking about the timeshare thing, and
The
then
time
we were
series,
like,
right? So I
yeah,
mean, like, all everyone that's asking you about it, yeah, they're are they dreaming? Like, are they willing to commit to something to see if it actually works? Or they're just asking about it and letting someone else do it. So, like, for you, is it like, hey, it sounds like a cool idea, and because you're in this space, it's one of those, let's say, even passion project, like, oh, you could find a new innovative way of doing your job. Like, that's appealing to a lot of people, right? You do what you like, you do what you love, you
mhm,
enjoy something, and this is a new part of something you're already doing. So to me, it would make sense. Like, it's a very appealing idea to you, and you're getting it reinforced, but without that commitment from other people of like,
absolutely.
without and of course you're doing this right now. You're like, hey, let me ask somebody else, what do they think about this? What do they feel about this? And I'm very practical in my reply of like, I don't know, it's not worth my time to risk it.
Makes sense. So that was it. So, is there anything else that you would want to talk about? Anything? Any other comment or question about offshoring, global team building? Anything related?
So I always like to say, so this might be a little biased, but can you share some stories about failures of outsourcing?
Oh, absolutely. So I'll share failures of both outsourcing and direct ownership. The biggest failure I see of outsourcing is not, not getting the right resources, right? It's just poor quality. So I'll talk specifically about India because that's where I focus. One thing that happens with outsourcing companies is you would hire a company, they would talk a big game, and then when the season comes, you'll realize, holy crap, this is so far from what I was expecting. Right. So that is a very common and like a very common and like a very avoidable problem that I see with outsourcing. Right. Now I'll also talk about direct ownership. Right. Challenge with direct ownership is training. Like I've seen firms, they don't train their employees in India the way employees should be trained. They'll use their US training material and they'll just transport it to India. They'll maybe localize it a bit, but people in India, for example, they love written instructions, right? Those instructions may be considered micromanagement here in the US, right? Here, even in Canada. So people don't do that, they stay away from it. So now you think you've trained that person. The person in India is scared to speak up, or maybe they also believe that, all right, I think I'm trained. And then the busy season hits, and you're like, holy crap, like I thought you understood this. And the employee is like, well, I thought that was not what you needed because that's not what the training looked like. Now you're in busy season, both with outsourcing and direct ownership. You don't have time to fix it, as you said. Time's short. So you're like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to edit that out. But oh crap, right? Um, I invested so much time, and now I can't take advantage of it. Now I don't even have time to fix it. So we'll take a look at it after the busy season. So those are like some very common things that I see. Um, Other failures, right? Let's see, with outsourcing, quality is always a problem, right? That you get quality that's okay, but then you're like, this is still not like, I still have to spend more time. I still have to spend time fixing all the things that were supposed to be fixed. With direct ownership, you sort of, one failure is like you don't anticipate that you do have to work hard to retain people in India as well, right? After a year is over, that person that you trained, now that person has an American company on their resume. They are extremely valuable now. So you go in thinking that, all right, I've trained this person, I'm going to have this person for a very long time. But then after a year, you realize, or 2 years, you realize, whoa, they're jumping ship. And it's a colleague or like another American company that's paying 30-40% more. So those are some places, very common places where both models can fail. Now, there are ways to avoid it, but those are some failures that you would likely address,
Yeah.
regardless of what route you take.
It's funny you say that too, because it's a very common problem in the U.S. too, right? Like, hey, whether small business owners or even corporate managers, they're like, man, I spent all this time training this person, and they left for a higher paying job, and I'm like, yeah, that would you not leave for a 30% raise? Like, it's a company, not a family, right? It's almost a
Yeah.
cringe word now with the younger generation. So it's a red flag if anybody says this is we're like a family. I'm like, are you? Are you? You build relationships, right? So I tell people, hey, the company's not your friend. I'm your friend because I'm a person. I'm a human being. I care. The company is not. And part of my job is to make decisions for the company. What's best interest of the company, which may not be the best interest of individuals.
Yeah.
So it's like the concept is it's a business. We're here for a reason, but we're also human beings. So, but this at the same point, like that person that you trained for 2 years, they're easily worth that extra 30%, right? Because they're worth more to you than they are to that new person for sure. Like the cost of replacing that person is just crazy. I don't know where that, unless the reason they're getting away from you in the first place isn't necessarily just the money, right? It's the bad work environment. It's toxic. They really just don't like the people, whatever it is. That those problems don't go away. But if it is just purely money, I see no problem in like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. You are worth it because anybody else that I would find to replace you that could be at the same level as you would cost me just as much in the market. And if
Yep.
they don't,
And
they're going to leave next year anyway.
that's true. So I agree.
Yeah.
So that's all, Saad. Thank you so much for your time. I loved our